2.5 million children are living in food insecure households in Canada. It's something that we have been told is inevitable and needs to happen for our capitalist society to function appropriately. And none of this is true. Campaign 2000 is a campaign focused on child and family poverty. What I love about the work that I get to do is create community. We are facilitating spaces where people are coming together, having conversations about shared goals, shared vision, shared objectives, and shared actions they can do together. And that is how we're going to get through whatever is coming at us. When we come together, we have the power to make change. And I'd also do it for the generation that's coming up next.
Hi, welcome. Welcome back to our podcast, The Zero Hunger Project. I'm your host, Sumen,
I'm Stacia.
and today we are going to chat with a good friend of mine, Leila Sarangi. Can you say a little bit about Leila?
I would love to. I'd like to welcome Leila to the podcast. She's the Senior Director of Strategy and Innovation at Family Service Toronto, a multi-service organization with community programs for people with mental health challenges who have experienced gender-based violence, and for adults and children labeled with developmental disabilities. As part of this role, she serves as the National Director of Campaign 2000, End Child and Family Poverty, a pan-Canadian coalition of over 120 organizations that came about in response to a 1989 unanimous all-party federal resolution to end child poverty by the year 2000. Leila brings with her over 25 years of nonprofit leadership, coalition building, and advocacy experience. She's a seasoned community builder and facilitator with a deep passion for connecting lived experiences to social action and public policy development to achieve long-term systemic change using intersectional and trauma-informed praxis. Leila has successfully initiated, led, and contributed to numerous anti-poverty and development initiatives locally and nationally, including localizing Canada's commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, CERB Amnesty Campaign, 2SL LGBTQ plus poverty in Canada, alternative federal budget, women in micro enterprise, and gender in the Toronto Poverty Reduction Strategy. She is the lead author of the annual National Child and Family Poverty Report Card and Disability Poverty Report Card. In her current role, Leila is invited regularly to testify at various Canadian House of Commons committees and has appeared at City Council committee on issues including income security, accessible public services, including childcare and housing, decent work, public health, gender equity, and budget and legislative changes. Leila was a member of the Mayor's Community Committee on Poverty Reduction, has co-chaired numerous community and research committees, and is currently the chair of the Board of Directors of Social Planning Toronto and a Board of Directors member at large of Childcare Now, Canada's National Childcare Advocacy Association. Leila is frequently sought out by local and national media outlets to comment on current issues related to poverty and poverty reduction. My goodness,
When
you
do you
are
sleep?
busy.
I'm also a mom, and you know,
You are.
The most important job.
Yeah.
yeah, I can't believe that's not in there.
It should be in there. It should be the first thing that came out of my mouth.
Yeah.
It did say that you have spent many years in your early and mid-career working in homeless women and violence against women's shelters throughout the city of Toronto. And also this part, which I think is really important, it was through this work that Leila learned that those who experience systemic marginalization and discrimination are often the furthest away from decision-making. Leila is driven by her belief that in sharing power, collaboration, and connecting across issues, we can build a more equitable, sustainable, and just society, which is the undertone of obviously everything that you're doing, including being a mom.
Yes, well, striving for that, yeah.
No, I think you're doing a great job.
Wow, it's amazing. It's inspiring.
Oh, thank you so much.
I had the fortune of meeting her kids over in New York at the high-level political forum at the UN.
You know, we
And
just
they're
ran into each other
amazing,
at the UN.
amazing
It's no big
kids.
deal. I bet they are.
So you're doing great.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise anybody.
No.
It was a pretty special opportunity to be able to bring the kids to the General Assembly. Yeah.
I'm sorry I can't come to school today to talk about the life cycle of corn. I have to go to the United Nations.
Hello, corn is important.
I'm just saying, that's what my son's doing in the third grade right now. And it is important. I've learned all about stamens and all kinds of other things. I haven't looked at that work in quite some time. Corn is very important.
Yeah, it is.
I should have picked something more banal than corn.
Especially in Canada.
Right.
Exactly.
But Leila, and I want to hear from you. how you see your work with the Campaign 2000, but the poverty reduction side of it and the food security side of it and the intersectionality between the two. Would love to hear some stories from you or something from you about that.
Yeah, thanks so much, first of all, for inviting me to your incredible podcast, and for this opportunity to chat with both of you. I do think that there is a really important connection between poverty and food security. So, when I always start my talks when I go out into the community and I'm talking to people, I always ask people right off the top, what is poverty? Like, what does that mean? And right away, people will for the most part, talk about the need to meet your basic needs. Can I afford shelter and food and stuff for my kids? Like, that's the first thing that comes to people's minds. Um, Poverty is also, a violation of our human rights. We have the right to an adequate standard of living. And even further than that, poverty is a social construct. It's something that we have been told is inevitable and needs to happen for our capitalist society to function appropriately, that we have to have some poverty, some unemployment. And none of this is true. It's like stories that we've been fed. And I think it's the same thing with hunger, right? Especially in Canada, we are a very wealthy nation. There is no reason that we should have poverty and hunger in our society. It doesn't, and there was a time where we didn't have that, and I'm talking pre-contact in our pre-colonized societies. But I do think I want to talk really specifically about, poverty as income. Usually it's looked at as in terms of its income. If you don't have enough income to meet the poverty threshold, then you're considered to be poor and are often facing that material deprivation. I can't buy enough food. But in Canada, the way it operates is you could be just above the poverty threshold and still facing severe food insecurity. And oftentimes, by the time with Campaign 2000 is a campaign focused on child and family poverty. Even just having children in your household makes you a higher risk at being food insecure. And the rates of children who are in severe and moderately severe food insecure households is really high. I think, I was looking at the data actually just before our conversation. 2.5 million children are living in food insecure households in Canada, but that's well above the number of children living in poverty.
Say that again. 2.5 million.
2.5 million children in the provinces, not the territories, in the provinces, and not on Indigenous or First Nation reserves, are living in food insecure households.
Mhm.
And those are the people who are showing up in the data.
Mhm.
It's massive. So, and we know that by the time they're in that number, like in that count, these families are already making choices of, am I going to buy my medication today? Am I going to, fill my car up with gas? I've heard this before. I'm not going to put gas in my car because I can't afford to. And that means I can't get my kids to school and I can't go to work. And all of this is exacerbating, experiences of food insecurity, but this is how it's showing up. And we know too, that I think the last thing I'll say on this point is that, again, in Canada, the way that these numbers shake out, they're not just numbers, it's disproportionate for our Indigenous communities, for Black and racialized communities, for single mother led households. We know that those households are experiencing higher rates of food insecurity. And again, I want to go back to, this is something that we have been told is inevitable, and it's really not. We have to reconstruct our narrative around what is possible in this country.
I think that's 100% true. I think we need to dismantle the toxic narrative that there needs to be somebody at the bottom in order for everybody else to get to the top. I mean, I think that's a foundational problem with late stage capitalism, such as it is, that idea even exists, that in order for some of us to rise to the top, the rest of us need to sink to the bottom. And the need for that to begin with is where we need to start. It feels like an overwhelming problem. How do you not get overwhelmed by that?
I mean, that is it. It's intentional to not get overwhelmed by that, right? For me personally, I feel like, I have to find those things that are going to keep me coming back to work every day, especially after so many years of doing this. And especially today with all of the, multiple crises that we have right now: housing, climate, food security, and poverty, right? Like these are huge issues. Um, but what I love about the work that I get to do is create community, right? We are facilitating spaces where people are coming together. They're, having conversations about shared goals, shared vision, shared objectives, and shared actions they can do together. And that is how we're going to get through whatever is coming at us. So that's what keeps me hopeful and active, is that ability to meet with people who are, also wanting to do something, who recognize that, when we come together, we have the power to make change. And I do it for the generation that's coming up next, right? I do it because I'm not going to do this work forever. So helping the next generation come in and do this work, thinking about the kids, my kids and their generation, especially post COVID, and the ongoing mental health effects. We have to really model that as civil society, we have power and we can reshape these narratives and we can do something different. So it's like a strong belief in that vision that keeps me hopeful and coming back to the table.
And also from a social justice perspective, doesn't it feel like an act of resistance to not be overwhelmed? Because I think the system in general, which was created by, for, and about a particular subset of the population, is designed so that most people don't flourish, right? And so the actual act of resisting the overwhelm and being like, I know what you want me to do is just lie down and be quiet, and I'm not going to do that, is sort of contributing to the forward momentum.
100%. And it doesn't have to be big actions. I heard somebody say the other day, she was like, rinse your recycling container. Even if you think recycling doesn't work, rinse the container. It's an act of resistance. These small little things add up. If we are all doing it, millions of people, the small thing within our power is going to stack and make a difference. Absolutely.
Leila, some of the data that you just talked about, and I find this a very difficult question. You might find it easier than how I find it. When we are going globally, talking about the challenges that we have in Canada, the data, the numbers that you just spoke about, we are met with a lot of disbelief. A lot of disbelief in the global community saying, you're Canada, you're one of the richest country in the world. And what do you mean 2.5 million children do not have adequate food? Like, how? And I find it difficult to answer that in a lot of cases. Do you have an answer to what you would say when you're asked this, when you work around the UN quite a bit as well and you meet a lot of people from different countries? How would you answer this question?
It is tricky because there is that relative nature, where at scale, some of these numbers around poverty, food insecurity, violence may be more and more concentrated. And so I think in other countries, and particularly in developing nations, war torn nations, so there is a sensitivity around it. However, I think a lot of people are not aware that Canada is a colonized nation. We're still a colonized nation. That our indigenous peoples, First Peoples, still don't have the right to self-governance. There are still everyday treaty violations, and these are the things that we have to talk about. Canada as a nation, Canada doesn't want that as a nation on the global stage, and I think it's part of our work um, is to talk about this context that we deal with, because for those families that are food insecure, that are living in poverty, that are experiencing racism, that are living in, reserves where there's still boil water advisories.
I was going to say,
Exactly,
where there's no
ridiculous.
clean water. Like,
There's no clean water. Remote areas that are flying communities, and access to resources is so limited, and the cost of living is just so extremely high. It's incumbent on us to talk about this, keeping in mind the sensitivities of a global nature. But I think, folks, and Suman, I've heard you do this well, like that complexity of our conversations, and it reflects our lived realities. So we just have to make sure we're leaning into those complexities and really having those kinds of conversations that hear other folks' concern, because I do hear, well, it's not as bad as XYZ, whatever country. But we also can look at what, on the other hand, are other OECD countries or like countries doing. So in terms of family friendly policies, there are a number of family friendly policies so that you can implement through fair taxation, redistributing wealth through a very powerful and progressive tax system, looking at parental leaves, looking at childcare policies. There are other OECD countries that do it very well and have very low rates of child poverty that are spending on average 2.6% of GDP into these kinds of policies. And Canada is not doing those well. Canada is spending about half of that, half their GDP, about 1.6% of their GDP in family-friendly policies. So I think there's some of that comparator as well in terms of the potential of what could be.
I have two questions. The first is for those people who don't know, could you please say what an OECD country is?
The Ontario Economic Cooperation. Suman, do you remember the exact acronym? OECD, Development Nations.
It is a coalition of countries.
Okay.
It is the Organization of Economic Cooperation.
Okay.
And that's the
And
OECD. There's a bunch
how
of
many
OECD countries.
How many countries are in it?
I don't know the exact number, but if I have to guess,
So like enough
around 45.
for them to have a
45
conversation.
countries.
Okay.
And they're, the typical, like your Nordic nations and then the European nations and then Japan and there's a lot of comparisons. For example, our partners at UNICEF do a report card every 2 years, and they'll look at all of those nations and how they're faring in terms of, youth health, family-friendly policies and things like that.
So
And
it's benchmark. They're benchmark nations,
Yes.
basically.
exactly.
Interesting. Okay. You were sort of alluding to that, or maybe starting to talk about this idea of what strategies do you see, or policies that you see, innovation that's happening that is making an impact in reducing child and family poverty? So you were talking about changing taxation. You were talking about different types of things. What other strategies do you think would be helpful, really helpful, and practically doable?
So, one thing that we're talking about right now, and this is a really easy policy fix. It's the Canada Child Benefit
Mm-hmm.
was a really powerful tool when it was implemented. Our custom research shows that it lifts about 600,000 children out of poverty, protects 600,000 children from falling into poverty. That's what our latest report card found. And we know in the pandemic, it was very easy for the federal government to to deliver top ups through that program and through other programs that people were already getting as a very quick way of boosting individual and family incomes.
Mm-hmm.
So we have worked with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives to model a supplement to the Canada Child Benefit, because although it's reaching 600,000 children, it's still leaving 1.4 million children in families in poverty. And their poverty is getting deeper. That means they're further away from that poverty threshold. Their families have less income. And in the climate of, this cost of living crisis, last week we had reports that the food price of groceries is growing at double the pace of overall inflation.
Yeah.
Those families that have less income are struggling even more. And so a benefit that's targeted directly to those families using the Canada Child Benefit could be a very quick, literally, if the budget this, on November 4th comes out and puts some money into that program, it could happen, very, very quickly in the
We
pandemic.
need to call somebody right now. Right now. Get your phone out, Suman.
That should be sailed.
Let's do the
budget is.
I'm just saying there should be somebody. Is there a hotline?
We have to invest in these kinds of things. And we're investing in, military defense, weapons manufacturing, we can invest in protecting children and families in the immediate, use what's available, and bump up their incomes to help with the deprivation, the material deprivation. But
And
Listen,
reinforce the social safety net.
as I say it, you cannot have national security if you have a poor and hungry community.
100%.
If you want real national security, we need to start from the bottom and invest in the bottom.
Exactly. And building communities is the most important nation building project. That is the most important nation building project we can have, is investing into social infrastructure, investing into people. Absolutely. And then on that, I think there are other things that we hear about from folks that and related specifically to food insecurity. We know that some of the Atlantic provinces have some of the highest food insecurity rates. And when we go out there and talk to people who are living in poverty and ask about their vision of a poverty free community, we've heard about food sovereignty and agri-food production and supporting people, and not just in the Atlantic provinces. We hear this in Indigenous communities and Northern communities, as well as I'm in Toronto, some dense urban populations. People are talking about food systems, owning the system or having an ability to shape that food system all the way from like growth and production to distribution. Like, how are we empowering communities to not just have a grocery store nearby to buy some food, but people who want to be a part of that food system and really look at what food sovereignty means in our different communities can go a long way. So I think as we are building out some of the bigger systems, we need to look at what we can do immediately in the short term to really buoy families out.
And Leila, you and your Campaign 2000, you've always been a powerful advocate for policy change and systemic changes. Now, what role do you think the grassroots mobilization and public awareness play in shifting that conversation on policies related to hunger and poverty?
So I think this is such a great question because to me, it's key. It is the way that change happens. We don't see big transformative change because somebody in government has said, "Oh, I want to do something vastly different here and I'm going to risk my career to make a big change." No, we see big movement and change and transformation happen because people have articulated, they've come together, they've, gotten educated, they've had their kitchen table conversations with the people around them, and they've decided to do things around an issue. And so to me, and I think that's, why Campaign 2000 values its coalition members and its partners so much, is because even though we all have our different scope and different areas of work, we can always find some shared goal. There is overlap in a shared vision. And the question is, how do we show up for each other? How do we support each other in doing, like I said earlier, even the little things that stack to make something big happen? But that public awareness, public education, talking to people and mobilizing, doing whatever you can that you have the capacity to do. And our role is really like, how do we facilitate? How are we going to create space for that and hold that? I think that is exactly where our power lies. It's exactly where our community is. It's exactly how we will make change happen. So to me, that's just crucial. Like, nothing's going to happen without that community building piece.
So, on the other side, what advice would you give to policymakers and advocates sort of at a higher level, at kind of a meta level, about how to make a more just food system or how to make this more equitable for everybody? What would you say to them if you had somebody's ear and a magic wand, gigantic bag of money? What would you do?
I mean, sometimes you don't need the, I mean, for me, what I would say, and I wouldn't frame it as a magic wand or a gigantic bag of money, only because then people are like, oh, it's too big to deal with, right? My response to those kinds of questions is talk to people who are food insecure. Talk to people who are living in poverty. I don't necessarily have their answers. I mean, I have some idea because I've been around and talked to people and really listen. And by listening, I mean not just listening because I'm going to respond, but listening because I'm really trying to understand what the challenges are, what the motivation is, what the solution is, and really having a deep understanding that even though people are, facing systemic marginalization, are struggling every day, may have compounding issues around, I don't know, mental health, substance abuse, whatever, that they are not, they are people with real ideas that and real solutions. And the job of a policymaker, the job of an elected official, the job of a bureaucrat is to really listen and understand and help to figure out what the policy levers are to achieve those things. So I really think on that other side of the coin, if you are somebody in power, the role really is to not just hold that power, but to share it and really understand, okay, what is it that this community needs? And how do we make that happen in those communities? I really think that there is so much more that governments of all levels can be doing around community engagement and being accountable back to their constituents.
And I really feel like what I'm learning through this process is that these initiatives have to be community driven. It can't be somebody in some office somewhere that has no connection to what's actually going on, boots on the ground. That's how you sustain sovereignty. That's how you sustain agency and autonomy in these environments, is if you're consulting with the people who have to operationalize these great plans that you're coming up with theoretically somewhere else in the world or in our country. Is this feasible for somebody on the ground to do? Are these goals achievable? Are they appropriate? Are they right for my? Are they culturally relevant and respectful? And is this something that's going to help us forward in a sustainable way, or is it just a quick triage to make you feel better and a footnote in a journal somewhere or a policy somewhere, right? I mean,
100%.
I think that's got to be at the basis of everything, is that this must be driven by the communities for which they're intended in order for them to work.
And I'll give just two very quick examples because that's exactly nail on the head. And so the Canada Child Benefit, for example, is not people who have precarious immigration status, even if they are living here and working and are residents under the Income Tax Act, are not eligible to receive the Canada Child Benefit. So I'm talking about families like, they've applied for refugee status here. They've been denied, but Canada won't send them home because their home country is too dangerous. So they're here indefinitely, waiting. And oftentimes they have Canadian born children and they're working and they're residents for their income tax purposes, and they're paying into the income tax system. They are not receiving the Canada Child Benefit because eligibility is determined by your immigration status. And so there is a charter challenge that some groups have put forward to get access for these families to get access. When the person who was part of developing that policy was asked, as part of the information gathering around what was the reason of hooking it to immigration as one of the eligibility requirements, there was no real answer. It was just like, oh, here is the list of eligibility requirements, and we put in immigration, and it doesn't have to be there. We have, again, with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, modeled how much this would cost, how many families, and how much would it cost. So it's about, maybe, I think the numbers, if I remember correctly, is 60,000 families and a few $100,000. So we're talking a drop in the bucket of the federal budget. And has the federal government opened up the Income Tax Act and repealed this subsection that is governing this? They won't do it. And when you talk to these families, like, it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any policy sense. But if they had been consulted from the outset, or if there was a will to actually meaningfully consult and make a change based on what they've heard, we wouldn't be dealing with this. How many years later? I think it's been almost 10 years since we've had the Canada Child Benefit now.
Suman and I were talking about the fact that we should develop a drinking game for this podcast for every time somebody says political will, because we say it a lot on this podcast in terms of
I love that.
There's no way we would get through. We'd be hammered by like halfway through.
And then what does that tell us, right? That it means that these things are achievable, and we need to vote in people who will make those changes,
And realistically, we have seen around the world where political will has improved lives. it's not an a unicorn.
Exactly.
Seen that happen, and Brazil is a great example.
Well, we talk about Brazil all the time because it was a live example of this person's in power, stuff's getting done, this person is left, everything stopped, this person came back, everything started again. So you can't tell me it's not political will.
Exactly.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
absolutely. So, Leila, two quick questions, and one is for campaign 2000, what is next? And the other one, which is one of my favorite, is you have a very short elevator ride, and our prime minister just walks in the door. You have a few seconds to ask for one policy. What would that policy be?
Wow. Okay, the first question. What's next for Campaign 2000? Well, we'll be with the Zero Hunger Project in Qatar on November 4th, 5th, and 6th for the second World Summit on Social Development, helping to shape conversations around global social development and sustainability, hoping to really reinvigorate and maybe light a fire under governments to achieve the 2030 goals, as many as they can. And then starting these conversations about what does the next iteration of our sustainable development goals look like, because 2030 is 5 years away and nobody is on track to meet our Agenda 2030. So that's coming up really quickly, and we're very excited for that. We are also working on our report card update. So we report out annually on the state of child and family poverty and disability poverty in Canada. And so reports are coming out over the fall and the winter. So we'll have new data releases, and we're going to continue our engagement. We're continuing our engagement across the country with people living in poverty. We're constantly iterating our recommendations based on what we're hearing on the ground. I think in my elevator pitch to the prime minister, I would say two things. I think I would try to pitch two, and one would be the Canada Child Benefit Low Income Supplement, because we know that this caucus does care about children. They have announced the food security program, that they're going to make it permanent, the National Food School Food Program, which is excellent, but doesn't address the root causes of poverty. So, and we've seen other indicators where they've talked about children. And so we want to talk about this quick win through the Canada Child Benefit as their signature poverty reduction tool. But the other one is a bit more of a niche um, policy, but it is so dire, and that is the CERB amnesty. You know, we had this pandemic 5 years ago, and I am still getting calls from families who are being taken by the CRA to pay back tens of thousands of dollars that they're being told they were not eligible for during the pandemic. So, just a couple of months ago, I had a call from a mom in Northern Ontario, a mother who is a supply teacher in a school in rural Ontario, and the school shut down. And you know, in Ontario had some of the longest school shutdowns in the whole globe, in the whole entire world. And when they opened up for a very short period of time in 2020, she went back and picked up a few shifts in a teaches special education. So she teaches kids with complex needs, but was still getting the CERB, the emergency response benefit, which she thought she was eligible for. Now, 5 years later, they're asking her to repay $22,000. And she's going through a federal appeals process, and there is a lot of people who are going through this federal appeals process. So the government doesn't know how much they're trying to recover. They don't know how much they actually will recover. They are only recovering from these individuals and families, many of who are in low income, where the notion, where the understanding of what was considered to be eligible income was really, it was different from what was in law, than what was in the website of CRA, than what CRA was telling people on the phone. There's so much misinformation, and they are not going after corporations who receive the wage subsidy, because the Auditor General of Canada said, oh, we don't have enough data on what corporations did with the wage subsidy, so we won't go after them, but you can more aggressively target individuals who got the CERB. This was in her report from a couple of years ago. So that is what they are doing. And I would say to Carney, just you understand debt, retire the debt. It's old debt. It's not good debt. You don't know how much you're going to recover. Just let's retire the debt and move on. Cut your losses and leave these families alone.
First of
That's a
all,
great
it was a
advice.
program that was rolled out badly to begin with. So it was a good idea in theory, but the execution was appalling from the jump. And second of all, you're now asking people 5 years later to come up with money that they didn't have to begin with, which is why they got the benefit. So it's flawed system. And then never mind the corporate special interest groups and all the other stuff who are at play.
And the amount of money we are spending to try to recoup,
And you're
that is
crushing these
amazing
people.
amount.
You're crushing them.
Like, even economically, I don't think it makes real sense.
Exactly. They're spending so much in administrative and in our court system to just go review these cases, and people are getting into repayment plans that are like 40 years long, where they're paying $10 a month.
And this woman is a frontline worker. She's a civil servant.
She was a hero in the pandemic.
Like, economically, it absolutely doesn't make sense. Forget about socially. Uh, you're never going to recoup that money. But we all think in silos. We are not thinking about the amount that court is spending, or the loss of productivity
No,
that the
but
person is
okay,
having.
and this is where I go
It's
back to, like, I don't know
sad.
how you guys get out of bed in the morning and keep doing this kind of stuff day in and day out, because I would get fired from my job. If I
But
had the job of the person that need to liaise with the government to say, hey, they'd be like, oh, Stacey, you need to leave. Because
but you
I
know
would
what?
be like
It is.
raging.
But Stacey, it is because of the person that you talked about, Leila. It is because of those person we get out of the bed,
I
because
know.
we need to stand up for them. That's exactly the
And
reason.
you have to be calm, cool, and collected, which is not obviously my lane at all. I can't. My poker face is horrible, particularly when there's some kind of injustice going on to that degree. It seems so absolutely moronic to me that somebody would invest an iota of time trying to get $22,000 out of a single mom in Northern Ontario. Like,
Who's a supply teacher for for complex kids with complex needs. It's just
it's a punchline to a bad joke. Like,
Yeah,
it's
but
not.
they are the ones who need the help, and that is
I
where people
know,
like
I
Leila
know, I
will
know, I
wake
know.
up and
And
get up of bed,
and
get out of bed.
and who appear to have um social justice at the molecular core of your being. I mean, I really, one of the things that has been such a privilege for me to be part of this podcast is to spend time with people like you, who, for you, there's just no other way of existing. And of course I'm going to do this because you believe, as I do, and I certainly know Suman does, that if you have the ability, you have the responsibility, and you don't have to do everything,
Absolutely.
but you do have to do something. And I just I am so in awe of people like you, who, against like real odds and really immovable objects, stand up every day quietly and consistently and say, no, thank you. That's not going to happen anymore, or on my watch, or whatever it is that you have to say to get things going. And it's, your bio talks about the things that you do, but it really is something that you embody, isn't it? It's something that's in the core of your being, and it's what you're passing on to your kids. And that's also an act of revolution, isn't it?
yeah. I mean, I hope so. Right? I have banked my life on that. If I'm wrong, then it's like, oh well.
I
No,
don't
you're
think
not
you're
wrong.
wrong. I
You're
don't
not
think you're
wrong.
wrong.
And I get to do it with amazing, amazing people. So like Suman, like yourself, the partners and the people I get to meet and work with along the way, it's incredible, and it just gives me so much hope, right? So much hope.
And it allows you to rest and have other people surge forward, and then they rest, and then you surge forward, right? Like, that's the this whole connectivity point of all of this social change and that type of thing, is that you don't have to be on it all the time, 24/7. There is a time you can sit, and other people will surge ahead and bring you with them. And then, and that's the way that you make change. It doesn't have to be these huge thunderous, sometimes it is these huge thunderous victories,
I
right?
don't know if Leila knows how to relax.
Um,
She's always go go.
I think it's important for people, though, because for a lot of people, that onslaught is not, it's
No,
not doable. It's not
exactly.
feasible. That there is a way to go because
You have to.
we're doing this all together. That there will always be somebody who has more energy and less energy than you on any given day to fight the fight, and to just understand that
And it's a
everybody's
teamwork.
connected, right?
And it's teamwork. We're
Yeah,
all in this together.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say I have an incredible team, and Family Service Toronto, as the backbone agency for Campaign 2000, has dedicated, resources to ensuring this work happens and ensuring that there is a team of people around me to make sure that this work carries forward. So yeah, I agree. It's teamwork, and part of the work is recognizing, okay, I need a bit of a break so I can actually show up tomorrow. And now how am I going to empower the people around me to step in when they have to, make decisions when they have to, and we all collectively ensure the work keeps moving.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Leila, thank you so much for your time and this conversation. I can sit here and talk to you for hours and hours,
Well,
but
and I think also there are some things that, that get brought up in these conversations that we can't be proud of in this country. But having you do the work that you're doing is something that we can all be incredibly proud of. So thank you very
exactly.
much.
Oh, thank you both so much. This was a real pleasure. I really value the opportunity to speak with you both and to share on your platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Leila.
Take care.